It's June 13th, 2018, and this is your episode 150 of At Percussion. I'm your host, Casey Cangelosi, and with me, as usual, are Ben Charles.
Hi, everybody.
And Caleb's back helping out. How's it going, Caleb Pickering?
Hey, good.
So you guys are guests today. He's been a performing vibraphonist professionally since the age of 15. He's an educator, social media entrepreneur, and creator of It's Not a Xylophone, just something you've maybe seen around. He's gained quite the notoriety for his jazz-influenced twist on modern-day standards from the likes of Michael Jackson and The Police. He also is an active advocate for the arts, having helped revitalize underserved areas of South Florida. He has extensive teaching experience in drum corps and beyond, and he's coming us today from the MalletLab Summer Intensive in South Beach, Florida. Is that right, Drew?
No, West Palm Beach, Florida.
West Palm Beach, Florida. How's it going?
Oh, it's great, man. It's you know, every time we do this, I really just hope people don't, want to leave or switch instruments. And every time it turns out to be something that it ends up being very impactful for the kids and really impactful for me. So I'm nothing but grateful right now.
Yeah, cool. How many years have you been doing it?
It's just our second year doing it. The first year, when you try to do something, you leverage all relationships that you can to try to make sure that you can afford it, and you talk to all the students you can, and make it as accessible for them without cheapening the value of it for them to be able to come down. And I thank God for those first 19 kids last year that believed enough in this wacky thing to come and hang out with us. And then this year we have almost 50.
Holy cow!
From 3 different countries, so it's been pretty cool.
That's really huge for just your second year.
Yeah, we meant to cap it at 40, but I forgot to take down the registration link, and I got like 4 payments in one night, and I was like, oh man. And then I was like going to tell them and refund their money because I didn't want to, you don't want to get greedy and then people have a bad experience because there's not enough resources. And then I looked at their videos and they were so killing that I was just like, and it was just amazing. And one of the biggest prerequisites for entry is they have to give me 2 recommendations of mentors or percussion teachers, and I call every one of them as much as possible to make sure that they're good humans. So it's just a lot of really good people here this week.
So you have this many people in spite of Eric Rucker.
Can you believe it? Can you believe it? Yeah. They would all leave. He's the one who keeps this thing running smoothly. He's the oil and the grease, because he's the organized one. So they may come down because of a lot of the people here, but they stay here and don't call for a ride home or get an early plane ticket because of how he organizes it. So.
Now, when we were talking to Eric about this, and I've always seen your name attached to MalletLab. Are you just a regular faculty member, or did you help create this?
Yeah, no. Wait, that was 2 answers. Yes and yes.
Okay.
So I ran like regular summer music general camps, like week-long camps for 7 to 13-year-old kids, and I did that for about 8 years, and it was fine. It was cool, but didn't really jazz me. It was more of a financial decision than anything else. And it helped. Oh, not really. I mean, it helped out the venues that I was running at the time is what they needed. And so when that ended, when it came about last summer, I said I would really love to be able to go to a camp that was, that could help kids here gain perspective. Because it happened to me when I went to Neboisha's camp about 15 years ago. I went to his camp, and up until then, I had been a marching band, drum corps trained. This is the only way to play the instrument type of guy, And I went there, and there were people who played in ways that at that time I had deemed inferior that were blowing me out of the water. Like, I mean, not even on the same scale of musicality, and they were playing in different grips and different ways, or just things I hadn't seen. And so for me, going to Europe and seeing people from all over the world come and play, I mean, honestly, I wanted to give that to a lot of the students that I see have that same mentality down here. When I started college, the first teacher that I had saw me play, and I was very drum corpsed out, and he was so, every lesson he would start with 15 minutes of telling me how much he hated drum corps and hated the way I played, and he didn't like jazz, and he wasn't a jazz guy, so don't bring that here. And I have all those parts to me. And there's a lot of kids who have all those parts to them, and they can use all of that. Like I always quote Bruce Lee: "The best technique is no technique." They can use all of that to create like some meaningful music, and so that's the big thing. So I wanted to do that, and I knew Eric. I trusted Eric, and I liked Eric, so I called him up, and I knew he was at Bach School of the Arts with those little mutants over there. I mean that in the best possible way. I love X-Men, and at Dreyfus, and I said, hey, and I knew he was strong organizationally where I was weak, and so I said, what do you think about this? He says, man, that could be really cool, and so we got together, had some whiskey, and planned this thing out, and that's where it is. And so just because of my social media presence, I've kind of been the face. So most people associate me with it. But it's been me and him for without him, it doesn't really work. So
was I totally wrong calling It's Not a Xylophone a brand?
No. I mean, and it became that way on accident. I just came home from a gig one day, kind of irritated, and changed all my screen names. And then Lot Riot, the guy who runs that, Matt Verberg, is a friend of mine. And I said, hey, this would be fun. And he kind of blew me off for like 6 months to a year. And then we just launched it. And we, and it just became kind of a big hit. So all we have is shirts and some Florida hoodies, which, as Ben knows, is a hoodie that is not hot, never cold down here. So it's like a hoodie for air conditioning, So
what you actually need.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because when I was doing my research on my topic for today, which we'll get to later, I came across there's an Arthur Lipner documentary called Talking Sticks, and I just watched the trailer from 2014, but especially in older generations than us, it talks about like you're playing an instrument that no one even knows what it is. Like you can't just say it's a marimba or it's a vibraphone and people get a picture like a saxophone or a piano. So yeah, it's always an interesting uphill battle.
Yeah, and that's in line with one of my deeper values, is that I really want to make it easier for the next generation, just like all of us do. And I feel like that's not going to happen if people can't even respect or know the name of it. So while it becomes kind of, even my friends and my family, they'll always rib me. They'll say it like it's the first time I've heard it. He's playing the xylophone today, but at least there's an awareness where there wasn't one before. So
yeah, absolutely. That's like the whole Laurel Yanni phenomenon is just made people well aware that Laurel's name is not Laura or Lauren. Yeah, it's just upped by, who knows what a percent. Caleb, how's that new drum set, buddy?
That was a quick transition. It's pretty good.
Quick. It's like, this is a chess game. This whole podcast I'm like 3 moves ahead.
This is actually Caleb's DMA oral exam right now.
It is.
Damn.
So it is good?
It is good. I will not name brands, but it is much better than the previously acquired and then returned and then re-required and then re-returned from damage from shipping.
That unnamed brand, was it something von Beethoven that they came twice broken? I didn't name it, so nobody will have any clue what brand I'm talking about.
I only know music from the 1900s and up, but yes.
Okay, it was a smart joke.
Yeah, DMA.
Yeah, do you have a Facebook question for Drew there?
Yeah, it kind of ties into what you were just talking about. This is Mike Newmeyer. He asked about the story behind It's Not a Xylophone, but he also asked about how this personal branding's helped you and how can we use branding to help our own careers. It's tying into social media more.
Yeah, I think that I had a teacher. Part of my schooling was in graphic design and advertising. And one thing that they always mentioned was that marketing is really just education, and it's helping people to understand what value you can bring to the table. And, I didn't mean to, it wasn't like I sat down and said, what kind of cool shirt can I create or what would kids kind of do? It was just something that meant something to me, and it was irritating me at the time. And I just kind of went full tilt with it. And then it just turned out that, a lot of people, which of course, when you think about it, are irritated and feel the same way. So it's kind of like a little bit of a something that they can kind of latch on to. And so I was at PASIC maybe when I launched these 2016 or 15. And I remember a couple of times someone would say, hey, can I get a picture? And I would move out of the way, like who they want a picture with, and they're like, oh, no, with you. And I was like, come on, and I'm like, all right. And that kind of happened more and more. And it was just this kind of odd thing. But I guess because of the name and because of what had happened, people just sort of grabbed onto it. But I think that in terms of how can it help you, I think as long as you're sincere, and I think some people either try to be somebody else or create something that's just like somebody else. And with music and with stuff like brands, as long as you're sincere about it and it really means something to you and it's who you are, then I think that it can help you if you do a great way to, if you share that thing that means something to you, and then hopefully you can have people around you, as I've been fortunate enough to have, who are clever enough to put it in a way that's marketable, and also by watching other people and how they do it, putting it in a way that, okay, I see how they package this, and I see the way their galleries look on Instagram, and I see how they engage, and I stay reading as much as I can and trying to stay hip to the trends. And but at the end of the day, if it's contrived or it's not you, it really doesn't matter what your brand is, in my opinion.
There's another question that ties into this. There's probably a bunch that are related to this, because Drew's just really so good at this and known for being good at this. But Mark Parrott wants to know, how do you stand out on social media in a noisy and ever-expanding space like the percussion community?
I think it goes back to the same thing. I mean, and this is another thing I learned. I know people, because of some recent mishaps and stuff like that, people don't like to talk about Naboisha and things like that. But for me, the guy helped me so incredibly just by being himself around all of us. And it was the first time that, someone at that level had shared so intimately some of the background in terms of how he's Serbian and things like that. And he shared a story about how when a lot of the Japanese marimbas really started popping up, that he quit playing because of their technical mastery, thinking he couldn't match up. And then he said that he just kind of realized one day that if he really put his own story into his music, being, Serbian, the wars, torn lands, the fact that he's an expat, things like that, and the traditional music that he did, that no one could be a better him than him. And so I really try to be just more sincere and less apologetic about it. And if I feel a certain way about something, I share it without apology. And I do my best to do that honestly. And if people love it, they love it. And if people don't like it, they don't like it. But I think I never try to be middle of the road. I try to be as honest and true as possible. So that way people can get to know actually me, because no one can be a better Drew than Drew, for better or for worse, and I also try to have good lighting in all my photos. So there's also that.
Post do look good.
It reminds me of, I remember like way back when, like episode 8 or something like that, when we had Lizzie, now what's her name now? Lizzie Van Wert, but back then it was Lizzie Galvin. And she talked about when she was like a little kid, she saw Evelyn Glennie play, and afterwards she ran up to her and said, "When I grow up, I want to be just like you." And Evelyn Glennie told her, "No, you should be like the best version of yourself. You shouldn't be, imitating me." And I think it's the difference between having like a hero versus trying to be your hero.
So I think that's the best. That's the best. People don't like to hear that advice. They want to hear more analytical advice in a lot of ways. But, it took a lot of reaching to even musically to figure out that I wasn't going to be playing the lines of Warren Wolf, or that I wasn't going to be playing like Stefan. And I could just play the music that meant something to me and be really honest about that, and people would come.
What do you got there, Caleb?
Yes, kind of right where you left off. Joe Smith had a pretty good Facebook question. The second half ties in, kind of aiming at, and I had this question too, what are some of the possible negatives and shortcomings with all the social media hype? I know for me, I see like so many people, again, you're talking about imitating. So many people are taking your model or Eric Rucker's model or the Trevino model. And now it's starting to get like, we're over polluted with, there's so many people putting their product out there that I don't have time to almost see everyone. So I guess standing out from that.
Real quick, it is interesting, Caleb, because I feel it is that way too. But you're the one who actually introduced me to Drew Tucker. And once you did, I noticed him so much. So it's funny, until you notice something, it does just kind of blend back with the noise. But as soon as Caleb said, "Look at Drew Tucker, he does this Instagram stuff, and he's a great vibraphone player, and he has such a cool production about how he does his social media," I noticed so much. Sorry, I was just a side note.
Thanks, Caleb, by the way. Yeah. So what are the negatives of the social media culture? Sort of, that's the question?
I think that's what he's going for.
Okay. Yeah. I think people can confuse it for reality. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's fairly curated. I mean, I have another social media account that's private with all of my family pictures and my wife and the ugly stuff and the memes and things that have nothing to do with my career. But you know, I put out the stuff that, and everyone does for the most part. I never complain on it. I never talk about the rough parts of this stuff. You know, I never talk about any of those things, which is the way it should be. I don't want to scroll through and see a bunch of people complaining. But sometimes I think, especially this younger generation who came up natives in this, can confuse that with the fact that it's all rosy, like, you know, and that is the way that it is, which is good.
You're watching someone else's highlights reel is the best way.
Exactly. And you're comparing it to your reality. And, you know, people can look at that and say, man, I'll never get to that point. But I'm like, you know, if 2 or 3 gigs pay late, you know, I'm in the same struggle as most people, you know. So it's I think that's a big challenge. And having a daughter who's 13 and who's a native in that, it's a little bit more real to me in that aspect. So I try to keep it real in a lot of different ways, and especially in my conversations. But at the same time, you know, a lot of people do reach out. A lot of people reach out and ask me, you know, what to do with this kind of, you know, how to get to a certain level. And I try to keep it as real as possible. And I answer everybody who emails at some point or another. So, but I think that's probably the biggest negative. And for me, it's just now that they have things like later.com and you can save your posts, just like any other job, I'll buy out the time to make a bunch of social media posts. So at least I know I have content kind of clear. I'll create the thing and I'll do it all like in an hour or 2 in a day. And then I'll just hop on and just post it so that it's not consuming my life in reality. So I can still be present with the people who are in my physical life, you know, at the time.
Yeah, great. Ben, what do you have for us today? I think you have something you're going to tell us about.
Yeah, so when we were talking about Drew Tucker, I knew I wanted to talk about a jazz vibraphone player today, and I kind of went through several, and I came back to one of my favorites. And the thing that's kind of stands out about Drew is that, like, he's not the sort of he doesn't just play like the jazz standards. He has his sort of own hip hop take on things. And this other one, I think, is sort of the originator. Maybe Drew can back me up on that. The originator of that sort of idea. So today I wanted to talk about Mike Mainieri. And normally when I do my research for these things, I have so much trouble just finding enough information. And I actually almost found too much information on this person. But if you're interested, most of what I'm going to talk about comes from a Percussive Notes article from 1997. And it's called Mike Mainieri, The Paths Less Traveled. And then it pulls from some other PAS articles as well. But just the sort of backstory on Mike Mainieri, he was born July 4th, 1938 in New York City. So he's actually coming up on a big milestone birthday here in a few weeks. He grew up in a show business family, and he learned how to tap dance at a young age, which he credits as being an early rhythmic influence. And just a little fun fact for anyone listening, Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson, and Steve Gadd are also all tap dancers. He saw Lionel Hampton perform at the Apollo Theater at a young age, which made him want to start studying vibraphone. By the time he was 13, he was actually leading his own bands. And he said it was a combination of his entrepreneurial spirit and the fact that no one else knew what to do with vibes in a band that led him to lead his own bands. He auditioned for the Paul Whiteman radio show with a group he started when he was 13 years old, and he won, which led to appearances on a variety of children's TV shows. And this is like one of the coolest music stories I've ever heard. He went to a jazz concert at the age of 17 years old in 1956 at New York's Village Gate, and it was Buddy Rich's first night back after a year off of playing after a heart attack. And Rich stood up in front of everyone, announced, "We've got a kid here from the Bronx who says he can play the vibes and looks like he has his father's suit on. So I'd like to invite him up on stage and see if he can play as well as his father says he can." And he said he felt like he played like 40 choruses. He got a standing ovation, and Buddy Rich hired him on the spot. So that is like a cool story. And then shortly after this, get this, shortly after that, Buddy Rich actually fired his entire band except Mike Mainieri. And again, he was hired when he was 17 years old. So he's like 17 or 18 years old. Buddy Rich fires the entire band except for Mike Mainieri, and then tasks him with hiring the new band and writing all the arrangements.
How cool, though.
So, I mean, that's like what we call trial by fire. So he toured with Buddy for 6 years. He played opposite of the greats like Miles Davis, Art Blakey, Horace Silver, and others. And after a world tour, which included traveling to, it looked like the Middle East and Asia, he left Buddy's band in 1962 after 6 years. And he decided I think he was about to get married. He wanted to kind of settle down in New York and start doing some studio work. So that's what he did. And then he says he was, around 1962, there was another musical phenomenon happening called the Beatles and rock and roll music. And he said he was super into that music. It spoke to him really closely. And so he joined what is possibly the first jazz rock fusion group called Jeremy and the Satyrs. And in this group, he actually rubbed shoulders with the likes of Jimi Hendrix and Frank Zappa. And then here's the quote that, like, everything Drew was talking about just came to me in this quote. And I thought of Drew Tucker when I read this quote. He says, "I wasn't out in the trenches playing bebop or jazz like Bobby Hutcherson or Gary Burton or Milt Jackson, but this was the path I chose because I loved the music I was playing," which I thought was so cool. And so he worked in the studios as an arranger and a percussionist, and then because he was such a renowned vibraphone player, often he would end up playing marimba and vibes on these recordings. So, for example, we all know the Don McLean song American Pie. He was called in to play congas on the recording of American Pie. And then during the same recording session, there's another song which is beautiful if you're not familiar with it. It's called Vincent. And they actually asked Mike Mainieri to play marimba on Vincent. So he's the marimba player on Vincent. And I went back and I'd never even noticed there was a marimba on it because it's kind of in the background. But there he is right there. And so then he says playing with diverse musicians drew his attention to the acoustical limitations of the vibraphone and the challenge of miking it. And in this article, he talks about some of the different sort of bizarre things they went through with this, but he ended up creating a pickup system for the vibraphone, which he says sort of opened the floodgates for experimentation. And if you're curious, if you look in the article, it talks about he actually was drilling holes in his bars in the nodal points and like putting mics in the bars. So, wow. But yeah, and then during the same period, he created an instrument, I think with the help of some other people, called a Synthivibe, and it had a 5-octave range, and it worked by picking up static electricity from the player, which it was actually stolen at, I think it was JFK Airport, and he said he'd never seen it since. But it sounded like just one of these like bizarre, kooky, like 1970s sort of science experiments. So yeah, he's created many, many different groups with the likes of Michael Brecker, Steve Gadd, Eddie Gomez, and Peter Erskine, including groups Limage, Steps, and Steps Ahead. And he's recorded with many, many great, very well-known popular musicians, including, of course, as we mentioned, Buddy Rich, Aerosmith, Paul Simon, Paul McCartney, and Billy Joel. And I think one of the most prominent Mike Mainieri tracks in my mind as far as his studio work is concerned is the Paul Simon song Train in the Distance. Has like a very, very prominent vibraphone part, and that's Mike Mainieri. And then my favorite Mike Mainieri tune is Beirut by Steps Ahead, which when I was at UNT as an undergrad, we actually got to play a little percussion ensemble arrangement of that with Steve Smith on drum set, and I got to play the transcription of Mike Mainieri's vibraphone solo, so it was super cool.
Nice, yeah.
So
I
yeah,
played
that's
that in Nashville, at Nashville Drummers Jam with Tom Hurst and the saxophone player from Dave Matthews Band, who currently his name is escaping me. Don't know why. But yeah, so I flew up there just to play. It was a Steve Smith tribute, which is why you said you have Steve. It was a Steve Smith tribute. And Tom Hurst calls me, who organizes that Nashville Drummers Jam, and said, "Hey man, everyone else is doing Journey. I want to do something different. Let's do the Steps Ahead tune, Beirut." And I was like, I need a vibe player. So he flew me up just to play that one song.
Nice.
Amidst all of this, and we had like the singer from Chicago was there. Like it's a pretty big deal that he puts on. It's pretty amazing. But so I got to play, I got to do that. So that was pretty awesome. So I love that.
Caleb, didn't you play a major part in that?
Yeah, I got to play Beirut as well. I didn't get to play the transcription that Ben did. I actually played the shaker.
Good.
So, yeah.
And I'll tell you something about Mike Mainieri that's interesting is when I first got introduced to him, it was a lot of the Steps Ahead stuff, and some of it you really couldn't. He wasn't that present, depending on what album you got into and where you found it. And I was like, man, and this is what I was kind of concerned about earlier on. I don't really care much anymore, but I was like, man, I don't know if Mike, does he play any jazz? And my teacher was like, dude, here's the album you need to check out. And it was called Crescent. And it's just bass, vibraphone, and saxophone. And it's probably my latest child, listened to it probably the most from womb until 2 years old was that album.
Yeah.
Every time we were in the car, it would just relax her so much.
Another one of those people is like Pat Metheny. When you think of Pat Metheny, he does all the cool, hip, like sort of new stuff, but then he can just play like good old jazz too, like totally like that. Yeah. Shoot, I was going to say something about Mike Mainieri, but now it's slipped my mind. Oh, I was just going to say, if you're not super familiar with him, there are many good videos on YouTube of him playing, just sort of the nature of, this sort of music. And there's actually a group, and I haven't actually looked into it too much what it is. I think it's called Next Steps or something like that. It's a big band, and it seems to be sort of I think it's in the Netherlands maybe, and it's like a combination of like youth and professional musicians. But there's a recording of them playing Beirut with Mike Mainieri takes a vibe solo on it. And there's also some kid, like, looks like he's 16 years old, that plays a killer Michael Brecker sort of Iwi solo on it. So that's another one to check out for sure.
Well, if you watch the video of Beirut, like from, I think it's like 1984 or something,
the one, you'll see Tokyo Live.
Mike, yeah, Tokyo. And you'll see Mike, and there's a stack of keyboards next to him. And he's running, that's where all the sounds are coming from. He didn't have main stage, so all that pickup and all those crazy sounds, you're just running it through each keyboard as a different sound layered on top of it. And it's kind of incredible because I'm sitting here like, man, I didn't know Mike Mainieri played 5 keyboards in steps ahead. And then I realized that it was just, or however many there were, it was just because that's where the sounds were all coming from. Like, I guess I didn't have main stage back then.
What a cool guy, though.
Yeah, for sure. But I do feel a lot of those same ways about, it's just, hip hop has always spoken to me since I was a teenager. Like, as much as I always loved Frank Sinatra. He was one of my favorites just coming up. And I always loved Miles Davis and Coltrane and all those giants. But all those real book songs, those standards aren't my standards, Mm-hmm. They're other people. Like, I don't remember, my first kiss wasn't to, you know what I mean? I don't remember the year that Coltrane came out with his latest. I was, you know what I mean? I wasn't, I don't remember going on a date and that was my soundtrack. Like, the things that were happening to the events of my life were Tupac, were Biggie, were Pearl Jam, were, and those types of things when they came out. And even Britney Spears, for that matter, like the whole pop resurgence of like that, those are the things that, and there's a Britney Spears song on my album, but those are the things that meant something to me. So I remember when Prince came out, Tears for Fears in the 80s. So those are the things that really meant something to me. So when I kind of sort of, I didn't know why it was kind of a chore to always be learning these standards for me. As much as I love and appreciate them, it was always kind of a chore. But helping to be able to do these songs that meant something to me and do the way I sing, which is with a vibraphone, has just really excited me. And kind of is when my career started to sort of go in an upward motion.
Well, you guys, that is just thanks, Ben. That's excellent. But that is just too good of a segue for me not to jump on now that we're talking about pop music. So I have a What's the Sound for you guys today. And basically it's a series of little short pop song excerpts, but they have something very particular and common in the melody. So you may have bumped into this online. It did kind of go viral, but let me know if you recognize what this is. All right, Ben, you want to say what it is?
So there's this like YouTube video that went around like a while back that it's called the Millennial Whoop, and this little minor third alternating thing is like in like every like popular tune.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this is something commonly referred to as the Millennial Whoop. Caleb, have you heard of this too?
From a while back.
This may be a while back.
Just really quickly, like when this came to light, my friend David Pagel, who we had on like a few episodes ago, he was like, Millennial Whoop, what are you talking about? David's like super into like old like church music, and he found like some example in like Bach or something of the Millennial Whoop.
So there's definitely history in that minor third, like in every language, little kids have their na-na-na-na-na song that has to do with minor third and like same kind of about the same tempo. and there's lots of little rhymes and tunes that have to do with that. So there's definitely some history there. But this whole thing went viral due to a guy named Patrick Metzger from his blog, The Patterning. And let's see, he said... Yeah, so on his blog entry titled The Millennial Whoop, a glorious obsession with the melodic alternation between the fifth and the third. So this blog is called The Patterning, and the entry went viral and has been reported and shared over and over and over just by like every online news resource out there, like Slate, The Guardian, BBC, etc. So straight from his post, he says, I like to call this melodic snippet the Millennial Whoop. It's a sequence of notes that alternates between the fifth and the third of a major scale, typically starting on the fifth. The rhythm is usually straight eighth notes, but it may start on the downbeat or on the upbeat in different songs. A singer usually belts these notes with an O phoneme, often in a whoa-oh pattern.
I always love when people do, like, what do you, when you say the singing, what is that called?
Oh, right.
I don't know what the term is for it, but when you say the whoa-oh pattern.
Sprechstil.
I'm trying to be clear and articulate in my speaking. That's all that is. So he says so many pop songs use this that is criminal. And it's fun to watch some of the way people are using this, because some people will say, oh, here's why pop music is boring, or here's why pop music is awful, or here's why pop music really works. And he goes on to explain that this is just one of many key ingredients in the modern pop song formula, and that, yeah, okay, maybe every pop song sounds the same to you. This might be one of the reasons why, but also like Ben said, he mentioned Bach just a few minutes ago, so many of the genres and time periods, even if you just examine classical music, they also have their little versions of the millennial whoop, whether it's the alternating fifth down a step to infer a lease or whatever. Like there's so many of these, so I don't think we can fault pop music for this particular fault. They do say there's a lot of science behind creating songs that already seem familiar. So a lot of songs out there, especially songs that are in the consumer market and they're just solely trying to make a buck, same tempo, same key, a lot of the same sound effects, a lot of the same forms. And of course, this little thing is just one of the latest ones that has really caught on.
Have you ever listened to Chili Gonzalez Pop Music Masterclass?
No, but that sounds familiar.
I don't know if it's on Einstein Radio, I believe. I don't want to butcher the German language. But he'll introduce himself as like, "Hi, I'm Chili Gonzalez, the musical genius, and I'm here to analyze another tune." And he'll play like, So Fancy, and he'll talk about the na 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 na. I'm so fancy, na 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 na, and he'll talk about why that caught on is because of that. But he does that with pretty much most viral hit songs, Bruno Mars, Taylor Swift. It's actually really interesting, and the pretentious introduction is maybe my favorite part of it.
This what this always reminds me of is talking with Alejandro Vignao, who is obviously a very well-known, very contemporary, masterful composer, and he talks about this serialism a lot, especially like it looks brilliant on paper, and you can get so excited about how your 12-tone row works. And then when you play it back to people, no one really likes it. And so he talks about like, okay, like I understand the legitimacy and the validity of compositional technique, but if I can't get people to enjoy my music, like I don't feel like I've done my job as a composer. So he'll take some sort of idea, like I don't think he's ever actually done the millennial whoop, but he'll take like a hip hop beat as a musical foundation and like, okay, how can I apply my compositional techniques to this to make something that is both compositionally sound and intellectually stimulating, but also like sort of catchy, for lack of a better word, something that's enjoyable to listen to. And again, I think this is also like a very Drew Tucker thing. Like you can sit there and like improvise over whatever crazy harmony you want, but if no one wants to listen to it, no one wants to listen to it.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not a free jazz guy. Like I like to make people dance, So I just happen to do it with a vibraphone. Happen to fall in love with the silly instrument. That's all.
So, I have a little theory. They say, okay, they want this in songs so that it's familiar and it's something you've heard before and you already feel like you're kind of ahead of the song as far as knowing it, if that makes sense. The first millennial whoop, I think that was implanted into our heads. I'm just going to tap out for you guys real quick on my keyboard here. And once I think we're all millennials here. So if you recognize this, and you will, just go right ahead and sing along. So you should know this. Oh, that's too loud. Sorry. Here we go. Oh, sorry.
Is that DuckTales?
Right? You say DuckTales, Drew?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Right, so there's the DuckTales woohoo. Yeah, that is the fifth and the third. So I have conspiracy theory that is Disney implanted that in our brains, 30 years ago to now sell tons of Hannah Montana and Miley Cyrus records.
One thing I'd be interested in is because it's not just an interval of a minor third. It's that sort of it seems like it's usually in a higher range and alternating back and forth. I wonder if physiologically, if that's an easy interval for people to sing, if people like it because it's very singable.
Oh.
Sure. Well, yeah, it seems like it always comes in a big chorus moment where you could always, hold up your hand and sing along, easy to chant with.
Well, isn't that
chanting? Yeah, I mean, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think we're about to say the same thing. Yeah, if I call Casey, I'm not gonna be well, I might just scream Casey, but it's probably gonna come out Soul Me. If you're screaming your kid's name or something, Robin.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's like
that was a major third, by the way, Caleb.
Oh, thanks. I learned that.
Thanks. Yeah.
Not yet though.
That's why I have a DMA and you don't.
Hey, I want to go back to MalletLab for just a second. Drew, you said there were some upcoming future plans for MalletLab. Can you let us know what people could look forward to?
Yeah, we are doing a keyboard percussion competition. And I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to be all internet. And so that's going to be a lot of fun. So the first round is going to be on Instagram. So it's going to be, there's some details we're working out, especially in terms of when the list or what lists we're going to use to make it. But the first round will be essentially on Instagram. So it's your best minute of your solo or whatever you want to present. And then the semifinals will be on listed YouTube. We have a panel. You're all on it. Surprise. And it'll be panel judged, and then the finalists will be publicly on YouTube, and it'll most likely be a popularity contest at that point. Most likes, most shares, things like that, most comments. And the hope is that, and we're still working out details, but the hope is that by the time it gets to the finalists, any of the top whatever percentage that we received could easily win, and at that time it's for that. And so we're gonna give away some really cool prizes that have to do with PASIC. We're going to give away a weekend pass to PASIC, a year PASIC membership. We're going to do a featured booth concert over at Musser booth, and then we are the Von Beethoven booth, and then we're going to do another one at Mode. It'll be over 18 and under 18, and then we're going to do a live. They're going to have commissions by two very well-known composers they'll do world commissions live in the ballroom that we rent in the Hyatt.
Wow, cool.
So that will be fun. And then of course we have next year's MalletLab, which is already decided on the dates, and it's in the same place. And the earlier, of course, we get that out, the better. And so we're trying to figure out. We want to do a winter intensive as well, and a lot of other good and fun things. And we're doing a publishing company. We're trying to release an etude or exercise every week, except for in MalletLab season when we don't have time. And then we're just giving them away right now, and we'll see how it goes from there. And we're working on some really creative publishing company ideas where basically everybody who writes with us for us is a partner and retains the rights to their music. So, or at least gets the rights back after 6 months to a year, depending on the deal. But one thing we don't want to do is keep the rights forever. We want people to be able to have and own their music. We just want to be able to launch it and give it a platform.
But wouldn't you make more money if you just published their stuff and paid them like just dirt, nothing?
20 cents? Yes,
Yeah.
I would. But
Yeah.
but I don't think it helps our culture. I don't think it's the future, and
Yeah.
I definitely think that a lot of the self-publishers have kind of learned. I mean, there's rare outliers. I think Ivan may be somewhat of an outlier when it comes to the success of self-publishing in a lot of ways. And I think he just hit the right timing with YouTube and popped out a few great things. And it really kind of hit when the getting was good and really has kind of propelled him. But I do think that everyone needs a team. And I think that if we can provide a team with something that really does put the artist first and just helps give them a launching pad, we get the value of being associated with them, and then they get the value of getting that little step up, and then they are able to own their stuff. If somebody comes by and wants it for a movie, I shouldn't make 90% of that money. I just shouldn't, no matter how they found out about it. They should. The composer should.
Yeah, great. You have some published articles posted, and one of them is called "For God's Sake, Don't Major in Music Education."
Right.
Can you tell us a little about what's in there?
Yeah, you had to get to the punchline of that one for it to not make you angry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's because it says just don't do it unless you really, really want to. And it just essentially, I get kid after kid who says, no, I really want to perform. I want to play. I love playing. Kids who sit in the practice room for hours a day, like they bleed this stuff. And then they're like, but I'm just going to get a music education degree because it's safe.
Job security.
Right. And though there is such a thing in today's climate, right? You just never know anymore. And at the end of the day, I know a lot of people who have done that and then realized that music education wasn't all it looked like when you were in high school and your band director hid the secret stuff that goes on, like paperwork and logistics and how much they actually teach music versus do everything else. And some band directors, like one of the ones that I is one of my clients down here, she lives it and loves it, and she breathes this stuff. And there's such a deep love of the job of public school music education in that niche. And as a result, her band program thrives and the kids feel it. And then I've known ones who are just there because they were too scared to go after their music career, or, just this was the safe thing, or things were tough. And the kids feel that too. They're not stupid. They feel that. And so when people go into music education, like it's the surefire, safe, this is a good career because it's money and that's the only reason I'm doing it, it's a very low likelihood that they'll be successful. And if they are, as defining success is continuing to keep a job, their students will suffer for it almost invariably. And so I feel like music education is a hero's task. And I think that those who major in it and want to go into the public school system specifically and deal with the challenges that come with that should be revered as somewhat fearless. And if they're not that fearless, then they shouldn't do it. They should reassess is what was the point of that.
Wow, that's great. I couldn't agree more. Well, I think when people say it's safe, they're often confusing it with it's easy. It's
Right.
like, okay, well, maybe there are some more paved path job opportunities out there, but man, it is not easy, that's for sure.
Not at all.
Yeah, and then,
not at all, man.
So, yeah, and I'd also like to just, back up, totally agreed. John Parks also had an article about that, which I remember a while back I tried to find it and I couldn't. But yeah, John Parks talks about that exact same thing. It's like, don't do this unless you are passionate about it. But I have a sort of follow-up Facebook question to that from Michael Mortilla, not sure which.
Sure.
And it says, what is Drew's advice for young musicians that are just starting a career in performing?
So we actually spoke about that last night. We had this improv section with me and Warren and Sasha, and they talked about, a lot of that stuff. And they kind of quoted a story, I guess I had said about how I used to roll my vibes into every place that I could roll them into. Or I would walk into every cafe and ask about playing there. And I would say, hey, you have music? And they would say, no. I said, well, listen, I'll play here. I'll bring my piano player friend. And if you like us, we'll play for free. And if you like us, just give us $100 a week for a month. Give us a month contract. And I would do that everywhere, from hair salons, stylists. I didn't care. I just went into everything that had a door that was open. And obviously I would get a lot of rejection. And, he asked if, I don't think it was, anyway, he asked if I thought that was still a viable way to build a career. And I said, I don't know. But what I learned from that was I always ask. You know what I mean? I became fearless in my asking of things and building relationships. And as a result of doing that, I mean, there's so many opportunities that I can't tell you that I've come across because I just said, hey, can I go with you on doing that? Hey, that's a great record. Can I do that record? Yeah. Whereas, or, I'm going to be in Texas. Why don't we go on this tour together? Oh, okay. I never thought of that. And it's a person who I don't, and I play the vibraphone, right? We play the vibraphone. So the amount of times that I get a phone call to go play the vibraphone is really, really rare. Maybe I can to go do the thing I do, maybe play in the back of a pit orchestra for a musical or something, but to do what I do is rare. So if I don't create the opportunities or create the landscape to have it, I won't be able to have it. And I think a lot of people are waiting for the phone calls. And if we're going to play an obscure instrument that people don't know the name of, we have to be willing to go out and create those opportunities. Rent the space. Early on, I would rent spaces, pay for them. No one would know. It seemed like I got hired to play the space, but I would rent the space and then market it myself, fill the space, and then I would get hired for the space. And I just think there's in my experience, the people who have called me usually don't like that answer. Like they want to know, so where do I go? What book do I read? And what class do I take? And then I'll get the job.
Yeah, one and done.
It was never like that for me. It was always, I just go out and, and where people have said, and this is where, I talk about how Eric and I are like yin and yang. This is where he's like, whoa, this is not going to be the thing. And I'm like, we'll just go ask anyway, and it ends up working out. Now, sometimes he reels me back in where I'm like, let's just rent the whole music building. And he's like, do we really need all 20 rooms and 2 theaters? We want to be able to do this again. And it's like, oh, yeah, you're probably right. So, yeah, that's what I would say. I would say you got to create opportunities as a young musician. You have to be fearless in your ask and create as many opportunities as you can without waiting for permission.
Or really, not even as a young musician, just as a young anything, I think. But 2 things come to mind here. One is, of course, the story earlier about Mike Mainieri. I don't know if it was him or his dad just walked up to Buddy Rich and said, hey, my kid plays vibes. Can he play with you tonight? That's pretty fearless. Another one like this just popped into my head as Drew was talking is there's a very famous person. I'll tell you who it is in a second. But at 12 years old, he was interested in electronics.
Chorus room.
And at 12 years old, he opened up the phone book and found the number for Hewlett-Packard and called Bill Hewlett, the founder of Hewlett-Packard. And at 12 years old, just said, hey, I want to work at your place. And he actually got a job there. Let's see here, assembling frequency counters. And my favorite story about this, by the way, this is Steve Jobs at 12 years old.
Yeah.
And he said, I remember my first day expressing my complete enthusiasm and bliss at being at Hewlett-Packard for the summer to my supervisor, a guy named Chris, telling him my favorite thing in the whole world was electronics. I asked him what his favorite thing to do was, and he looked at me and said, to have sex. But it was a little more vulgar than that. Again, this is 12-year-old Steve Jobs talking to his supervisor.
You guys have mentioned Buddy Rich a few times. It just reminds me of a story Bill Kahn just told us over in the Tocolo Tucson Festival in Arizona that I just got back from a few days ago. It's just another Buddy Rich story. I mean, you can imagine what it is, but, a kid played for Buddy Rich in a master class or something, and he goes to the kid and says, "Tell your teacher that I told you suck," or something. Just another one of those. What do you got, Caleb?
I got a little Facebook question that I was also curious about as well. I know for me, this is from Ryan Carlisle, maybe?
Sure.
Sure. So it's talking about this issue that I've dealt with as well, teaching mainly in Texas. So you have these kids do drum corps over the summer, or it's a slamming front ensemble in the fall, and then getting their hands to go from drum corps mode back into let's not break bars mode sometimes. But Carlisle's Drew talks about today's percussionists being technicians and curious about balancing musicality versus technique.
It's funny because that's actually the other article that I wrote, which is we're raising these technicians, culturally instead of musicians, and I think that at the end of the day, there's a million things you could say on it, but teaching students to curate their own sound as the primary reason for the choices that they make, I think is something that a lot of times we lack. And I know in drum corps and marching arts that they lack a lot, so, I mentioned one of the comments that I made that really got people hot and started, was the fact that I said, in middle school, instead of just, kids are grabbing whatever things are available and hitting them. And because, you get this instant feedback from a xylophone in terms of pitch, that you kind of get, put to the side while you focus on all of these skills that horn players have, like listen, tuning, opening your ears up, blending, finding your place within the ensemble. These conversations don't even happen for us in most, at least here in South Florida, in middle schools. It's just sort of like play the role, play the thing. And at no times are we ever just asked, and at any point, okay, you're playing a snare drum. Great. You get yelled at. That's too loud. Play it softer. But say, hey, how do you feel? I mean, just simple as that. Like, how do you feel about that stick choice? And people were saying, well, people can't afford all these mallets. And I say one of the solutions that I put in there was having choices for the kids in percussion to play and helping them make those choices and why they make those choices, which doesn't take that much time out. But, you get the argument about there's no money. And there's no money, and these schools don't have all this money to get a bunch of mallets. And I say, okay, fine. Let's say you got 3 choices. You have a rock, you have a paper clip, and you got this Q-tip. Which one's going to make a better sound on the snare drum? Whatever you have to help them to curate, with whatever choices they have, help them to make good decisions regarding their sound. And I think even when you get to marching band, it becomes and marching band in and of itself it's a sport, right? It's our team sport. And the major value in it is in the things that you get from team sports: camaraderie, leadership. It's somewhere tertiary or below is the musicality aspect of it. So when you go to a drum corps, understanding that that's the sport you're playing is fine. But the problem is when they enter out of this middle school sort of, trying to come up out of the situation and culture they're in into a high school where now you're seeing 2 and 3 marimbas, you're seeing wood instruments, maybe vibraphones you may have not even seen. I didn't see a vibraphone until high school. I didn't know what they were. I had xylophone, glockenspiel, and then membranic percussion. And so when you see that, and the first thing you're like is, all right, here's grip the mallet, jackhammer the instrument because we have to win by November. And then you have instructors who are just there for that purpose, who spend most of their time in front of these kids, and then they leave and they're gone. So their view isn't to a full year view or a full, holistic education, and they have a job to do. And so I think with today's solution-wise, with today's modern electronics, I think there's no need to be teaching a separate technique, to be totally frank. I think that we need to find that middle ground, at least, if not, help the kids, A, to be healthy, B, to be to understand what good sound sounds like. And instead of fixing everything and micromanaging, especially in the high school primary level, to say, hey, how did that sound to you? What do you think was wrong? What do you think could be done? Getting rid of terms like inches when talking about keyboard percussion. I can go on about that forever, but the way that we approach our marching band idiom doesn't, just because it's marching band, it doesn't have to be,
Don't look at the chat.
I know, I gotta stop. It doesn't have to be,
Ben is the worst of chat offender. Caleb brings out the worst in Ben. I'm sorry. You were saying something valuable, and then,
yeah. I love it. I love it, man. But yeah, that's all. I mean, just helping kids curate their own sound and open their ears, man. And I don't think we do enough of that. It becomes about the teacher, like, hey, look how clean I made this group, or look how, instead of saying, look how they've achieved. And, so my ensembles at the high school level will take forever to clean. They'll be dirty until November. But once they lock in and they figure it out, they can't play. They almost can't. They fix their stuff so fast. They recover so fast. And that's one of the biggest prides that I have in the ensembles that I teach.
One of the problems I've observed is you want a kid to, like you said, okay, you don't have all the mallets in the world, but you might have 3. Why don't you choose the best sound of these 3? And my experience has been, okay, you have this expensive, let's say, vibraphone, 3 different expensive mallets, and the students are inexperienced, they're young, they haven't listened to a lot, they don't have a good palate for what sounds better. They just think, they think the mallet that costs $50, the vibraphone that costs $9,000, it's certainly a higher authority than they are. It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, this is the right kind of mallet, right? That's the right instrument. I mean, I guess that's how it sounds. It's
Right.
often worse. I've noticed on drums. You know, a tom tom will be just like head is way old. It's way out of tune. It's it's not
Right.
the tension isn't balanced. They're like it sounds like a garbage can, and they're young. They just kind of go like, well, I guess that's how it sounds. I feel like it's a hard battle, to educate.
It's got to start early, man. Got to start
Yeah.
early. Just helping them make choices and open their ears up. And it's a quick thing to say, okay, hold on, Wins. Hey, what did you think about that percussion? Did you like the way that sounded? Why not? What do you think you should use? How can we make it better? Cool. Back to tuning flutes.
Right.
At the very least, just help them out a little bit to curate their own sound.
Of course. Yeah, no, that's great. Could not agree more. What do you got there, Ben?
So, Drew, I had one last question I think might be a sort of nice thing to close on, and I think you'd enjoy talking about this. And I've asked a few of our other guests this before, but you have a daughter that is now a percussionist. And
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the sort of dynamic that brings to your relationship? And obviously, like, you want to talk about music all the time, but you also want to just be like a normal dad. So how does that play into your upbringing of your child?
Well, both of them are really into music. My 4-year-old is obsessed. My 12-year-old does it academically. My 13-year-old now, sorry. And she's here at MalletLab, and she's having a great time. She doesn't breathe and live it. We don't talk about it that much. We talk about music in terms of, we analyze stuff we hear on the radio. We talk about pop music. I let her hear like dirty loops and all these rearrangements of songs that she likes. And overall, my only goal with them is to have a really positive relationship with the instrument and with music. And just like my 4-year-old will be on a vibraphone all day. She won't even know a TV exists. She will play. She has really decent technique, actually. And I never taught her anything. I haven't shown her anything. And she just continues to watch. She comes with me to teach half the time for her year 1 and year 2 of her life. She was with me at almost every class that I taught at Boca High. And she knows how to play 4 mallets technique better than kids who I've taught. My 4-year-old, that is. And so for both of them, I just try to make sure they have a positive relationship with the instrument and with music, and they see how they can create. And I let Eric's my 13-year-old's teacher at Bach, so I let him do the dirty work of scales and other things like that. Obviously, if she needs help practicing, then I'll help her out. I'm going to be a little more formal over the summer in terms of lessons with her, but usually I just want to if she needs help, I let her ask, and I kind of give her space, and I want that to be something that's hers and not just she does because daddy does it. Mm-hmm. My 4-year-old won't have that problem. It'll be the other way around. Like, she won't do school. She'll just want to go on the road. It's ridiculous. I know a lot of parents will say that to me, like, my kid loves it, but this kid, she's nutty. I mean, she just loves it. You ask her you play music too, Logan? And she'll be like, yes, I play the vibraphone. What's that? Look at me. I'm like, it's like a metal xylophone. Let's move on. But yeah, that's the most important thing for me with them. We don't talk about it too much. We go on dates and have a good time. We just do the normal stuff. And there's a marimba and a vibraphone in the house. She practices when she does. And that's still a constant battle. And I try to tell parents that all the time. That I'm still trying to get my own kid to love to practice, but she just wants to do what kids want to do, which oftentimes isn't practice, and that's okay.
That's so nice to hear. Have any of y'all ever been around crazy audition parents?
Once,
man. So me first, man. I doing my master's auditions. Of course, we're all adults now auditioning for master's programs, but you're standing in the hallway. And for me, it was Boston Conservatory, NEC, and Eastman. At all 3 schools, there was at least one set of parents, and I think usually more than one. But they're in the hallway, and I just remember it so clear. My parents came with me, and they said, "Yeah, cool. We'll go walk around Boston. We'll go do some stuff. Okay, you're in the right building. Okay, you got all your stuff. Okay, well, we'll be back in like an hour to see if you're done." And they left, and that was it. And of course, my parents are not musicians, but man, seeing these other parents waiting in the hallway with their kid, and they're just grilling them. Okay, now who was John Beck? Yeah, and who does he play for? Who was his teacher? Now, how long has he been in the Rochester Phil? No, that's not right. It was blah, 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 blah. And the kid, you can just tell they're just like, they're ready to hang themselves. It's just, they're just like, oh my God, let it end, Was yours similar, Caleb? Well, sorry, Drew?
No, I was just saying, I think that for me, I mean, this instrument has given me so much, so many opportunities. I've traveled all over the world. It's just given me so much that, and the discipline that has taught me and those other intrinsic values that there's many articles written about. I want my kids to experience those things and have those opportunities. that they may not have otherwise. You know, if they go into accounting, they may not get to travel the world and play cool places and do good things and have fun like that. So, and if that's all it ends up being, is that they get a couple really great experiences, then I'm super happy with that. As long as my daughter does the thing that makes her heart sing and just, you know, does it all the time, you know, and does it to the best possible quality that she can, I'm cool with whatever that thing is. But she can't quit until she's out of high school.
Yeah. Caleb, you see some crazy audition parents?
Just a handful, and it's always the same ones. It was always teaching in some of the nicer schools or helping out in some of the nicer schools, and the helicopter parents that basically, yeah, the kid does not want to be in music anymore because they've just like sucked the fun out of it. And it's a real shame, especially when you have them from a young age and say middle school, they're loving it. And then they come in and mom and dad have sucked the fun out of it because they're so invasive with their art form they're trying to do.
Yeah.
I will say this though, that my older daughter Emily, when she gets on stage, she has ice water in her veins. Nothing rattles this kid. Like, she is the consummate professional since she's been 5 years old. Whether she's prepared, unprepared, you know, it doesn't even make a difference. Like, you will think that she has been working at this for her whole life regardless. So I think that's going to come in handy, I feel, in a lot of different areas regardless of what she does.
Wow, very cool. Well said. Drew Tucker, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. I'm excited to be on that list of other guests, man. This is an honor, absolute honor. Oh,
sure. Yeah, you're very, very welcome. And congrats on MalletLab. It sounds like you and Eric are just doing great, and it sounds like it's a blast to be there right now.
Yeah, man, it totally is right now. I'm trying to get some sleep, and no one sleeps, so that's the only issue we're dealing with currently. And cool. and there's Warren over there.
Oh, and sweet, Warren.
Eric. They all say, hey, it's Casey Cangelo.
Well, it's good to see you guys. Thanks again, Drew. Thanks so much, Ben and Caleb. And we'll catch you guys next time. It's going to be episode 151 with composer John Sathis. And is that it? Yeah, that's it. You can hear us on iTunes. You can hear us on Stitcher, all those types of podcast things. So, okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.